His personality. At a young age, his parents recognized that he has antisocial and sadomasochistic behavior. His parents said that when he was 12 years old, he had tried to strangle himself to death with a rope in the bathroom to satisfy his sexual desire. He was prescribed medication by a psychiatrist. When he was 4 years old, he grabbed the penis with a wire connected to the drawer. In 1942, he was in high school era. He is described as a slightly above average student and not very athletic. He enjoyed music, photography, and eventually became a delivery driver. At the Elmira Correctional Facility, Dr. Ralph Ryan Kahl described him as schizophrenic and using sexual drive as a criminal motive. The doctor in charge of Glatman had a different view and thought that the defendant knew what was right and what was wrong. Harvey Murray Glatman is a serial killer born the 10th December 1927 in the Bronx in New York, in a Jewish family. He grew up in Denver in Colorado. His parents were Albert and Ophelia Glatman. When he was released from prison in July 1946, his mother moved to New York and lived with him to escape his reputation in Colorado. However, as soon as she turned around, Glatman went back into his clothes. Realizing that owning a firearm while on parole would keep him out of jail for a long time, he decided to buy a well-reproduced fake gun. In 1948, he was transferred to Sing Sing prison. A few months later, when he was 21 years old, he was described as a model and intelligent prisoner. He remained under supervision for about 4 years, then returned to his parents to live with his family in Denver until his father died of diabetes in October 1952. In January 1957, he moved to Los Angeles as a television repairman. He lived in an apartment on Melrose Avenue and presented his experience as a model photographer to his victims through various pseudonyms. After Glatman was unemployed in November 1957, he returned to his mother's house to live for a few months, but returned to Los Angeles in 1958. After his arrest, investigators believed he was connected to other cases, but there was no evidence. During the interrogation, Glatman believed that given the statements of the police officer, who also accused him in other cases, the police were aware of his criminal past. Then he told them to pretend to be useless. They know for the toolbox. The investigator was absent and then asked what box Glatman was talking about. He explained to them that he had a hidden picture of the victim in that box. They pretended to know about it and ordered a patrol to retrieve this famous box, which will be used as evidence for the trial, and some of the photos are now available on the internet. It will also end with a taped confession which will be used in the trial. His mother visited him and told the media that he was sick. His trial began and he pleaded guilty to mental disorder. On December 15 in 1958, he was sentenced to death and transferred to San Quentin State.
Starting in 1944, he went for a walk and stole another gun, this time a more powerful one. He pointed his gun at the woman on the street, but said he wasn't very interested in money. He was first arrested on May the 18th in 1945 when he fled after trying to break into Elma Hammom's apartment. Elma Hammom called the police directly. Soon, he acknowledged some recent crimes, except for those related to sex. He was prosecuted for the robbery by one of his former classmates, Beulah Hand, who recognized him after his arrest. 3 days after his arrest, his parents decided to return his spy money, and he was finally released. On August the 17th in 1946, he attacked the couple Thomas Saros and Doris Stone, tied the man up and shot the woman with a gun. But Thomas finally managed to dissolve and threatened. Glatman. Glatman decided to move to Albany County, where he had at least 3 sexual assaults. He attacked a nurse named Florence Hayded, and the other two which he attacked were Evelyn Baird and Beverly Goldstein. Everyone reported this attack to the police, who eventually arrested Glatman. He was sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison. Jody Dole on August 1st, 1957. He called Jody Dole to take her pictures in his studio. He introduced himself as Johnny Glenn and expressed his willingness to pay $50 for the nail picture. Picked her at home. She lived with 2 other models, Betty Carver and Lynn Lakers, took her to his apartment, started tucking her picture tied her with a rope, and told her it was for a magazine before taking a picture of her with a gunpoint. Then, at night, he raped her and forced her to watch television with him while fondling him. Glatman was 29 years old at that time. Jody Dole was a young blonde model who needed money to win the divorce case and secure custody of her baby daughter Susan. It was his virgin representation. She had only 19 years old. He tied her up again and told her they would go out, and then he would set her free. They stopped in Indio, and he told her he was going to rape her a second time, and he did. He tied her up for the last time, but this time he killed her and hid her body under a pile of sand near the road nearby. In December 1957, her body was found in skeletal form, and the rest was swallowed by desert animals. On March the 5th in 1958, Glatman, also known as George Williams in this case, and a 24-year-old divorced model, Shirley Ann Bridgeford, a mother of 2, met in the Patty Sullivan, a single dating club. He promised her a great night dinner, then dancing, but after eating, he advised her to walk around. He ended up taking her to Mount Vallecito, near the Mexican border. He raped her, kidnapped her, and took pictures before and after her death. He strangled her with a rope to kill her. On July the 14th, in 1958, the landlord of the apartment was Ruth Mercado. A 24-year-old model and dancer reported Ruth missing. 4 days ago, she took picture with a stranger, who was Glatman. He raped the young Mercado and tied her up before and after strangling her. Her body was hidden near Escondido, not far from Bridgeford. He founded a modeling agency called Diane Studio. Lauren Vigil is a 24-year-old model and his first model. She agreed to model for Glatman, who was posing as Frank Johnson. On October the 27th in 1958, he drove her ashore, but ultimately did not make it to Hollywood. She asked him why, and he told her they were going to his studio after all. But when Glatman started on the road to Santa Ana, Vigil was worried and asked him many questions that Glatman could not answer. Glatman was annoyed with Vigil, stopped on a small road nearby, and pointed her gun at Vigil. In every possible way, she managed to disarm the attacker and led to his arrest. Unfortunately, she was subsequently fired by her employer. She did not appreciate the bad publicity of the case, and also she courageously allowed the serial killer to be arrested. Public approval was only limited.
Elma Hammond hid broke in her apartment on August 17, 1946. He attacked the couple, Thomas Starr and Doris Stone. 3 sexual assaults, North Florence Hyde, Evelyn Berge, and Beverly Goldstein. Jodi Dole on August 1st, 1957, Shirley Ann Bridgeford on March 5th, 1958. On October 27, 1958, Lauren Vigil. It seems that Blackman preferred young women who were in their 20s. He had an obsession with ropes and liked to have control over his victims.
He looked at their faces when he strangled them and enjoyed seeing their swollen faces. When he killed, his victims were under his control. It was the only time he felt alive. At his trial, he was described as a sadist who knew the difference between right and wrong. He enjoyed hurting people. He preferred to kill his victims when they began to complain of pain.
Stewart Wilken was born in Boksburg on November 11 in 1966. He came from South Africa. He was a rapist and a serial killer nicknamed Bowtie Boer. He went from sexual assault to murder. He was abused in his childhood. At the age of 6 months, he was left alone with his sister in a telephone booth. He was found by a worker who left them with his employer. The man's name was Dub. He sexually abused the young child and burned the boy's genitals with a cigarette. Wilken was forced to eat the dog's food within the dog's bowl. He was raped by Dub for a year and a half. When he was 2 years old, Mrs. and Mr. and Mrs. Wilken adopted him. He was malnourished and had lice. They called him Stewart, but he preferred to be called Bowtie Boer. Then they moved to Port Elizabeth. He was not good at school. He failed 3 times in grade 3. His classmates made fun of him because he was adopted. The teacher did not react, and the next day Stewart attacked the teacher. As punishment, the cool headmaster beat him. He bit his adoptive mother and other children. As punishment, he was locked in his room. He was also punished for wetting his bed. There was an accident when a boy attacked him and he fought out. He was expelled. His adoptive mother did not take his side, so he decided to be his father, mother, sister, and aunt. At the age of 8, he started to smoking marijuana. When he was 9, a deacon raped him. That same year, Stewart's adopted father died. The mother sent him to a reformatory. There, the older boy raped him. He joined the army and was released because he tried to commit suicide. He moved to Dispatch with his adopted mother. He met Lynn, who became his first wife. They have a daughter. After a birth, they decide to practice only sodomy. Later, he forced his wife into prostitution. He sexually assaulted his wife on several occasions. She had him arrested for smoking marijuana. They divorced later. Stewart did not have sex with white women for fear it would be his sister. That's why all the prostitutes he killed were black. He met a woman of color called Veronica. They got married and had 2 daughters. The marriage was not a happy one. Veronica's parents accused Stewart of raping Veronica's first children. He then isolated himself. He killed his daughter because he did not want her to live a life of horror.
Stewart Wilken was punished to 265 years in prison for the murder of 9 people, including his own daughter. The total number of victims is uncertain, and he is suspected of having murdered 6 prostitutes and 4 boys in Port Elizabeth. His victims ranged from middle-aged women, only prostitutes, to young children, regardless of gender or race. He was engaged in acts of rape, necrophilia, sodomy, and cannibalism. He was interrogated by Sergeant Derek Nosworthy, now as the best South Africa detective, who left Stewart alone with the pictures of his own daughter, who was the same age as Stewart's daughter, and made him confess his crimes. He pretended to kill children to protect them from life's cruelty, even his daughter. She said to him that her stepfather raped her, so he decides to strangle her to death to protect her from the pain of living with an abusing past like he did. For the prostitutes, he claims to be sick and can't stop himself. After killing his victims, he returns a lot of time to the corpses to practice necrophilia on them, even the day of his arrest.
In February 1990, a 15-year-old child, we don't know his name. In 1990, a prostitute strangled to death. In January 1991, another prostitute strangled to death. In October 1991, a 14-year-old child. 3 anonymous victims in 1993-1996. Henry Baker, 12 years old, disappeared in 1995. His own daughter Rain, killed in January 16, 1997.
Peter Woodcock was born on the 5th of March 1939 in Peterborough, Canada. His biological mother was Weta Woodcock and she was 17 years old when she gave birth to him. She abandoned him after a month. Peter has grown up without any friend and with emotional problems. He developed an interest for sexuality at a really young age and pretended at consented sexual relationship with an 11-year-old girl when he was 13. He became violent in his relationship and started to search some victims to strangle when he was a teenager. He was psychotic and lived a major part of his life in psychiatric hospital. It was not possible for him to reintegrate society.
During his 3rd years of life, Peter Woodcock was an abandoned child who had grown up in multiple families before he met Frank and Susan Minard. Peter was a lonely child. From 1 to 5 years old, he was afraid of everybody, had probably suffered abuse from one of his first family. After 5 years old, he was not afraid anymore, but stayed a weird child and becomes the bully's target. His parents regularly took him to the child hospital to help him with his emotional problems. At 11 years old, he was described as an angry child with violent fantasies. He was a brilliant student in history, science, and math, but failed at making friends and had developed phantasm of child abuse.
On September the 15th in 1956, Peter met Wayne Mallett, a young boy who was only 7 years old. He strangled him to death. There is no rape or abuse evidence, nevertheless, some penis was written on the body, someone defecated near the dead body, and 2 marks was found on the cadaver, one on the back and one on his butt. On October the 5th in the same year, Gary Morris, a 9-year-old boy, was found dead. Peter Woodcock was riding a bike when he met the young Gary. Peter took him in Cherry Beach, strangled and beat him to death. Some paper clips were found in a ritual disposition around the body and it had a bite mark on his neck. Few months later, on January 19th in 1957, Peter was riding his bike when he saw Carol Voice. She was only 4. He proposed to her to go with him for a ride and took her to the Bloor Viaduct. Her body was found the same day. She had been strangled, but her death, released to a tree branch, violently introduced into her vagina. Some witnesses saw Peter leaving the crime scene and made a robo-portrait. 2 days later, Peter Woodcock was under arrest. First of all, he was only charged for the murder of Carol. His trial lasted 4 days and he was found not guilty because of his mental illness. He will be sent to the Oak Ridge Division of the Maximum Security Mental Health Center in Penetanguishene, Ontario. During his internment, he would undergo a lot of experimental treatment, even LSD, but nothing seems to work on him, and in 1982 he was transferred to another psychiatrist establishment, more permissive. He legally changed his name to David Michael Kruger. For his first permissive day, he convicted another prisoner to help him kill an inmate, Dennis Kerr. They both bike knives, hatchets, adjustable wrench, and other stuff like that. They attracted Dennis and violently killed him. Then they both raped his dead body and David went to denounce himself to the police for all his murders. He goes back to Oak Ridge and died there after 34 years old of treatment in his 71 birthday from natural death. We can relate that David Peter was a perturbed child who needs to dominate people weaker than him to feel better. Maybe his behavior was first a revenge against everybody for not being desired by his mother, then by other families and for being bullied by the other children. His victims. His first murders were 3 little kids because they were defenseless. It's interesting to know that he had been hospitalized when he was 1 year old for a neck twist and noticed that his 3 first victims were strangled by him. Also, the violence escalates from strangulation with 2 little marks on the body to stabbing an adult and sodomizing the corpse. We can see that he is more confident and finally organized because the last crime was clearly premeditated, but maybe the first one was not. The fact that he changes his name in jail can be the result of a volunteer to appropriate his own story by choosing his own name. We think that David was psychotic. He cannot make the difference between good and evil and doesn't try to hide his crime. That's probably why he stayed the rest of his life in a psychiatrist hospital.
Richard Angelo was a reserved, supportive teenager and had no friends. He was described as a quiet, gentle person who was always a role model to those around him. As an adult, he had very low self-esteem and wanted to be a pro to others to be the best. His first thought was not to kill people. Richard Angelo made his victims sick in order to save them later. It can be assumed that he did these acts in order to gain the respect of his colleagues. He had a lot of self-confidence and wanted to be recognized in those heroic acts saving people. However, his process of gaining recognition from others made him a criminal. His need for admiration was so great that he sacrificed lives. Richard Angelo was born in 1961 into a very religious family. He received good values and was considered a model child. As a studious and religious young man, he served as an altar boy at the Our Lady of Perpetual Help Church, a role of so great pride in. As an adult, he did not drink, smoke, or have much of social life. In 1980, he found his calling and began studying nursing at Franklin University in New York. At the age of 26, Angelo was on his own for the first time when his parents moved away. It was in 1987 when he started as a nurse at the Good Samaritan Hospital in Long Island, New Jersey, that his career in crime began.
Richard Angelo seemed to be a mature and happy employee of the Good Samaritan Hospital. Suddenly, the number of people in critical situations was increasing in the hospital ward. Patients with no worrisome problems were near death when Richard Angelo was working the night shift. Richard Angelo did not save every patient in a critical situation, but he was always ready to act and always seemed to know what to do, which earned him a reputation as a savior among his colleagues. Nurse Lauren Ball, however, had doubts about his behavior. In addition, one patient, Nancy Falabella, agreed with Nurse Ball and had already warned her daughter that she did not trust Nurse Richard Angelo. His victims were numerous, but Angelo had excellent credentials and a great deal of experience, making him a poorly qualified serial killer. Moreover, his aim was not to kill his victims, but to weaken them in order to save them and appear as a hero. He therefore easily gained the trust of his patients and colleagues. It was on October 11, in 1987, after the death of three consecutive patients and the statements of a patient who witnessed one of the crimes committed by Richard Angelo, that the latter was finally discovered. It was then that the investigation began. They discovered that Richard Angelo was poisoning his victim with potassium chloride and a nicotine. On October 14, in 1987, the police found Angelo and he did not resist long before confessing his crimes. Richard Angelo was charged and convicted on several counts, including second-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter, homicide, criminal negligence, and assaulting 5 patients. He received a life sentence with a maximum term of 61 years.
Richard Angelo, said to have killed 25 people. However, he will be held guilty for the murder of 4 people. Milton Putney, 70 years old, killed in July 1987. Anthony Green, 57 years old, killed in July 1987. John Stanley Fisher, 75 years old, killed on September 1987. Frederick Lagua, 66 years old, killed in September 1987. But he also allegedly murdered Joseph Sider, killed in July 1987. Joseph O'Neill, killed on September 1987. Nancy Falabella, killed on October 1987. Joseph Mirabella, killed on October 1987. Ruth Gardner, killed on October 1987. Richard Angelo's victims do not have a typical profile, either socially or medically, except that they were all patients of Richard Angelo at the hospital where he worked. The Good Samaritan Hospital was sued by this victim family.
Yang Zinai, also known by many names as Wang Gangans, Yang Zia, and Yang Lu, was a Chinese serial killer who confessed to committing 77 murders and 23 rapes between 1999 and 2003. He was dubbed the Monster Killer and the Monster of Henan by the media. To put it in perspective, Xinai killed more individuals than some of America's most prolific serial killers, including Ted Bundy, Ed Kemper, and John Wayne Gacy. Young was intelligent and clever, although introverted. He was a loner. He was never interested in making friends and never stayed in one place very long. His relatives, now living in Pennsylvania, often claim he was obsessed with the phrase Plateau Flats, a fictional place he created for stories of murder he had begun writing. His stories were written on everything he could find. He was also known for having drawings and outlines for various other ideas in notebooks. Often there are depictions of ideas he had for stories and films that he wanted to create. The reason for his killing spree remains a mystery. Some media reports claimed Xinai had been fueled by anger at society after a breakup. Still, others speculate that much like China's first serial killer, young Xinai murdered for pure sport. Who can say his reasons for committing these horrible acts? The only comment that the monster killer had that shed any light was, "When I killed people, I had a desire. This inspired me to kill more. I don't care whether they deserve to live or not. It is none of my concern. I have no desire to be part of society. Society is not my concern."
Young was intelligent and clever, also interested. He was a loner. He was never interested in making friends and never staying in one place very long. His relatives, now living in Pennsylvania, often claim he was obsessed with the phrase Plateau Flats, a fictional place he created for a story of murder he had begun writing. His stories were written on everything he could find. He was also known for having drawings and outlines for various other ideas in notebooks. Often there were deceptions of ideas he had for stories and films that he wanted to create. The reason for his killing sprees remains a mystery. Some media reports claiming Young had been fueled by anger at society after a breakup. Still others speculate that much like China's first serial killer, Young murdered for pure sport. Who can say his reason for committing these horrible acts? The only comment that the monster killer had shed any light was, "When I killed people, I had a desire. This inspired me to kill more. I don't care whether they deserve to live or not. It is not of my concern. I have no desire to be part of society. Society is not my concern."
Young was born on July 29 in 1968 in Zhenjiang County in Henan. Not much is known about Young's childhood. His family was one of the poorest in their village. He was the youngest of 4 children and left the village aged 17 to travel and work as laborer. In 1988 and to 1991, Young was sentenced to labor camp for theft. In 1996, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for attempted rape in Zumadian and released in 1999. The same year, he has a girlfriend, but she left him when she found out about a previous prison term for burglary and rape.
Young's killings took place between 1999 and 2003 in the provinces of Anhui, Hebei, Henan, and Shandong. He would pick out his murder victims, then back to their houses in the middle of the night. Upon entering his victims' homes, He systematically killed all each occupant, mainly farmers, with commonplace items including axes, hammers, and shovels, bludgeoning them to death. He would save the wife for last so that he could rape her before killing her. Xinhe constantly changed his murder weapon, possibly as a tactic to elude police. He was careful enough to wear new clothes each time and ruthless enough to exterminate whole families in several cases. There were only 5 survivors to give a description. Xinhe also covered his tracks by wearing a different size and style of shoes to each of his crimes. After each attack, he would bury the murder weapon and get rid of his clothes by burning them or throwing them in a nearby river. Each time, young Xinhe was able to elude the authorities. In November of 2003, Xinhe was at a nightclub when a few police officers entered to do a typical patrol. When Xinhe saw the police, he began to act strangely, which led them to investigate him further. They arrested him and got his DNA profile, which connected him to various murders throughout the surrounding provinces. When Xinhe was confronted with this evidence, he admitted to committing 65 murders and 23 rapes. On 1st February 2004, Young was found guilty of 67 murders and 23 rapes and sentenced to death in Luohe City's Intermediate People's Court, Henan. Young was executed on 14 February 2004 by firing squad. While little is known about most of Xinhe's victims, a few other stories have surfaced. In October of 2002, Xinhe snuck into a rural home and beat the father to death with a shovel. After the father was dead, Xinhe proceeded to kill the small child in the same manner. Next, he raped the mother, who was pregnant with her second child. He beat her to the verge of death, but she managed to survive. The woman incurred serious head wounds and has no recollection about that night. On 6 December of the same year, Liu Zongyan lost his entire family to the young Xinhe. His grandfather lived with his wife at the home of their son, Liu Zanwei, and his family in Liuzang village, Henan. Liu's son was in his 30s and had a wife, a son, and a daughter. That night, Zongyan was not at home, but in another house where the whole family would soon be moving in. But Xinhe snuck into the family home around midnight. Once inside, he hit the whole family in the head and face with a hammer. The blows killed Liu Zanwei, his wife, and children instantly. When Liu Zongyan entered the house the next morning, he was shocked by the horror before him. He later recalled seeing his granddaughter lying in a pool of blood with a hole in her head. Liu Zongyan's wife was still alive when he entered the house. She had been so badly beaten that the only thing she could do was blink. Unfortunately, after a 10-day struggle, she died in her hospital bed.
Shaya Studios has a shield. Chikatilo was an avid reader of communist literature. He was also a stalker for Biden by his parents. During adolescence, he discovered that he suffered from chronic impotence, worsening his social awareness and self-hatred. Chikatilo was shy in the company of females. His only sexual experience as a teenager was when he was just 17, jumping on the 11-year-old friend of his younger sister and wrestled her to the ground, ejaculating as the girl struggled in the grasp. In 1953, Chikatilo finished school and applied for a scholarship at the Moscow State University. Although he passed the entrance examination, his grades were not good enough for acceptance. Between 1957 and 1916, Chikatilo performed his compulsory military service.
Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo was born on 16 October 1936 in Yabloknoy, a village in the heart of rural Ukraine within the USSR. At the time of his birth, the effect of the famine was still widely felt, and his early childhood was influenced by the deprivation, made worse still when the USSR entered the war against Germany, causing the Ukraine to be the subject of sustained bombing raids. In addition to the external hardships, Chikatilo is believed to have suffered from hydrocephalus at birth, which caused him genital urinary tract problems later in life, including bedwetting into his late adolescence and later the inability to sustain an erection, although he was able to ejaculate. His home life was disrupted by his father's conscription into the war against Germany, where he was captured, held prisoner, and then vilified by his countrymen for allowing himself to be captured when he finally returned home. Painfully shy as a result of this, his only sexual experience during adolescence occurred age 15, when he is reported to have overpowered a young girl, ejaculating immediately during the brief struggle, for which he received even more ridicule. This humiliation colored all future sexual experiences and cemented his association of sex with violence. His younger sister moved in with him, and concerned by his lack of success with the opposite sex, she engineered a meeting with a local girl, Feina, whom he went on to marry in 1963. Despite his sexual problems and lack of interest in conventional sex, they produced 2 children and lived an outwardly normal family life. In 1971, a career change to school teacher was short-lived when a string of complaints about indecent assault on young children forced him to move from school to school before he finally settled at a mining school in Shakhty near Rostov.
On the 22 December in 1978, Chikatilo killed his first documented victim. 9-year-old Lena Zakotnova was lured into an abandoned shed where Chikatilo tried to rape her. Trying to control the struggling child, Chikatilo slashed her with a knife, ejaculating while doing so, confirming his psychological connection between violent death and sexual gratification that went on to typify all future attacks. He was tried for the killing of Lena Zakotnova and executed in 1984. On the 3rd September in 1981, Larisa Chachenko, 17 years old, became his next victim, strangled, stabbed, and gagged with earth and leaves to prevent her crying out. The brutal force afforded Chikatilo his sexual release, and he began to develop a pattern of attack that saw him focusing on young runaways of both sex, whom he befriended at train stations and bus stops before luring them into nearby forest areas, where he would attack them, attempt rape, and use his knife as a penis substitute to mutilate them. In a number of cases, he ate the sexual organs or removed other body parts, such as the tips of their nose or tongues. In the earliest cases, the common pattern was to inflict damage to the eye area, slashing across the sockets and removing the eyeballs in many cases, an act which Chikatilo later attributed to a belief that his victim kept an imprint of his face in their eyes even after death. Chikatilo evaded capture narrowly on a couple of occasions, Born on the 6th November in 1990, fresh from killing his final victim, Sveta Korostik, his suspicious behavior was noted by patrolling policemen at the station nearby, and his details were taken. His name was linked to his previous arrest in 1984, and he was placed under surveillance.
Eventually, Chikatilo's crime caught up to him, but it took a lot longer than necessary. By the end of his reign of terror, Chikatilo had killed 53 people. Here is the list of his victims: Lina Zakotnava, Larisa Tkachenko, Lyubov Beryuk, Lyubov Voloboeva, Oleg Positayev, Olga Kuprina, Irina Karabennikova, Sergei Kuzmin, Olga Stalmakenok, Laura Sarkisian, Irina Dunenkova, Ludmila Koshova, Igor Kotkov, Valentina Kuchulina, an unknown woman, Vera Chevkun, Sergei Markov, Natalia Chalapinina, Marta Ryabenko, Dmitry Tashnikov, Tatiana Petrosyan, Svetlana Petrosyan, Yelena Bakulina, Dmitry Ilyaryonov, Anna Lemeshva, Svetlana Tsana.
We keep going for the 27th victim, Natalia Golosovskaya, who was 16 and was killed in August the 2 in 1984. Lyudmila Alexeyeva was 17 years old, also in August 1984. An unknown woman who was between 20 and 25 years old in August 1984. Akmaral Seidalieva was 12 years old in August 1984. Alexander Chepel was 11 in August 1994. Irina Lushinskaya, who was 24 years old, in September 1984. Natalia Poklistova was 18 in July 1985. Irina Guryaeva was also 18 in August 1985. Oleg Makarenkov, who was 13 years old in May 1987. Ivan Bilosvetsky, who was 12 years old in July 1987. Yuri Tereshonok was 16 in September 1987. Another unknown woman was between 18 and 25 years old in April 1988. Alexei Voronko, who was 9 years old in May 1988. Yevgeny Muratov, who was 15 years old in July 1988. Tatiana Rizova was 16 years old in March 1989. Alexander Diakonov, who was only 8 years old in May 1989. Alexei Moiseyev, who was 10 years old in June 1989. Elena Varga, who was 19 years old in August 1989. Alexei Kobotov, who was 10 years old in August 1989. Andrei Kravchenko, who was 11 years old in January 1990. Yaroslav Makarov, who was 10 years old, in March 1990. Lyubov Zuyeva, who was 31 years old, in April 1990. Viktor Petrov, who was 13 years old, in July 1990. Ivan Fomin, who was 11, in August 1990. Vadim Gromov, who was 16 years old, in October 1990. Viktor Tishenko, who was 16 years old, in October 1990. And the last one, the 53rd, Svetlana Kolostik, who was 22 years old, in November 1990.